Struttura sono svelata, si discuterà.
Dove tocco Batman?
Posso svelare?
Dale.
No, c'è tanto che non dirò, poi. Dali do prosseguirne, da superiore sono competente strutture di sé, trebuie să întâlnire, trebuie să întâlnire de diverse.
И па ево го овој, на пример, и овој под него е само 2000 разлика. А овој оценет веќе 8.
Е,
Hi,
Hi, how are you?
fine. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
It's 1 minute before the official time. Hopefully, someone will join.
Hi, Wardhan. No, I know that online it's always so hard to know if people come or no. We once hosted um a webinar, and this was like after lockdowns where people were going back to in person, and we had like disseminated the event for like 2 weeks, and then only one person came, and so we like postponed it, and then the next time like 5 people came. But we were so surprised.
Now they are joining.
How often do you host these events?
Twice per year, 2 trainings and one webinar.
Mm.
Hi, Milos. Hi, Christina.
Kako ste?
Super, ti kako si?
Evo se nerviram so vreme, evo.
Što super je времето.
A već odboru, čovjek ne potopi nas ovde. Znaš koliko voda ima? Znači, те врнеше цела ноќ без престан.
И Скопје врнеше, ама не е толку потопено.
35 литри, каже, во Прилеп дека наврнал на метар квадрат. Да.
Hi, Marija. We will wait for 5 minutes if someone else will join, and then we can start.
Okay.
Okay, we can start if someone joins. She or he is welcome. So, however, the training will be recorded and the record will be shared with the rest of the members of COPASA and also available on our website. Thank you all for joining. We know each other very well, but we are very few, and maybe we can make it informal and let us introduce ourselves and let Daniela know what is the area of our work and where we work, and what are the communities or population that we serve through our work. Basically, the training is developed based on the needs assessment questionnaire shared with the members of COPASAC network, and the topic came up from that questionnaire. We, based on the needs of the members of COPASAC, we have contacted Daniela, and she helped us in developing the agenda and also in delivering the training. Daniela is an expert in the field, and she works at the Center of Community Research and Action at the University of Sevilla. And we work with her and her colleagues for a long period of time on the same issues. I will let her introduce herself, and maybe we can start one by one, and then start with the training.
I'm Daniela. Nice to meet everybody. But if you want, you can go ahead because I've included my introduction in the presentation, so I would feel selfish.
Okay.
Twice.
Okay. Borian.
Okay, yeah, I think we all know each other, but still, my name is Borian Pavlovski. I come from Association ESA from Macedonia.
Christina.
Hello, my name is Christina. I'm coming from Association for Legal Education and Transparency Led Station, which work in the field in the area of municipality of Prilep, Krvogaštan, and Dolneni. We work mostly with marginalized group of people, especially Roma and people from rural areas.
Thank you. Maria.
Hi, once again. My name is Marija Radović. I work at NGO Juventus from Podgorica, Montenegro. We are providing direct support to people who use drugs, people who provide sex services, prisoners, former prisoners, and we have a different department for direct support for migrants, young people, Roma population, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Milos is not able to speak. Okay, Daniela, we can start.
Okay. Well, it's nice to be actually like in a small, cozy group of people. And I think that we all work in very similar issues. Well, just personally, my name is Daniela. I work and live in Sevilla in Spain. I'm originally, by my accent, from the US, from Latin America, actually, but grew up in the United States. And I've been working with Roma women and Roma girls throughout the trajectory of my work, and know Borjan and the colleagues from North Macedonia very well. And so thank you so much for having me. I hope that what I've prepared for today will be really helpful and can just help us start a conversation around mental health. So let me see. Can you see my screen okay? Okay, well, I titled the presentation based off of my conversations with Borjan around promoting mental health and well-being through advocacy. So how to look at mental health from a human rights perspective, and what practical tools and processes can we do with the communities we serve to try to change the context where they're growing and living and being born. I'm from the Center of Community Research and Action at the University of Sevilla. Our work is, we're from the social psychology department, but we also work with colleagues from other faculties and other departments. And our aim is always to do our work partnering with communities. And we work with migrants, refugees, and ethnic minorities such as Roma. We've also, the type of work that we do is we instill citizen science and making sure that all the research that we do is centering the voice of, for example, Roma communities, migrant communities themselves, and reviewing the work that we're doing from a social justice perspective. And let's see. And here's just a brief view of some of our partners. We, like I've said, we make sure that we partner with community organizations and the research that we're doing. So we partner with bigger Roma NGOs, but also with small informal advocacy groups in a couple of neighborhoods here in Sevilla, but we also partner with other colleagues doing similar local advocacy work in Spain and other European countries as well. And our aim is to facilitate using research as a way to facilitate critical thinking, building capacity, but also accountability towards policymakers and for researchers as well. And me personally, I'm currently coordinating a project, and I wanted to share this mostly because I'll probably pull from a lot of examples right now. I'm working on a project called Andaromi, which is Andalusia, so the region of Spain where I am, and Romi, Roma women. And we're working with Roma mothers and daughters after a long trajectory of working with women and then working with girls. We realized that the importance of the work of working with both mothers and daughters. And I think thinking of mental health, this couple of weeks I've been working with a group of girls between 10 and 14, doing facilitating and trainings for advocacy, but really just sitting and listening to them and their different perspectives on their neighborhoods, on their family life, their early marriages. And it's interesting, I've been thinking a lot about the training, and there's just so many mental health issues that come up because of the contextual factors. And so throughout the presentation, I'll bring examples from the work that we're doing with the girls and the mothers for practical lens, and hopefully this isn't too academic, and the examples will help guide the conversation. And so the way that we organize the training for today is that the first part is I'm going to share a work that we did with the Open Society Foundations and other partners from Ukraine, Germany, and Italy, developing a human rights space framework to mental health. So I'll share a little bit our process that we did to build the framework, and then the framework itself, and go deeper into each dimension, and hear from you as well to see how you think this relates maybe to communities that you're working with in your countries. And then the second part of the session, I'm going to share practical strategies. So it's research, but really it's research for advocacy for mental health, So I'll provide key examples. And then the final part is we'll do more interactive conversation to develop an action plan for the COPASA network to advocate for mental health together. And so really it's, so you all can go home with, a shared result, but also it's an example of the way that we work with community organizations doing advocacy here in Sevilla. And so the first session, setting the stage, just a brief definition of what is mental health. This is from the WHO. It's a state of well-being in which an individual can cope with normal stressors of life. I like to think of it, there's a community psychologist. So I'm a community psychologist by training. And the community psychologist's view is, yes, someone can have symptoms of anxiety, of depression, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that person is abnormal. They may be having a normal reaction to abnormal circumstances. And so when we're looking and working with communities, we're not thinking, oh, this girl is depressed. We're thinking of the isolation, of the lack of opportunities in the context. And so it's not that the girl is acting abnormal to situations. She's having a very normal reaction to a stressful and isolating situation. And so the way we think of mental health is not from an individual. It's looking at a wider, broader social circumstances that are creating distress. And actually, if you think about it a lot right now after the pandemic, mental health has become a very hot topic around the world, not only with vulnerable communities experiencing vulnerabilization, but it has become a hot topic because it's become normal to think of the isolation from shutdowns or from Zoom meetings or their normal reactions to ways that we weren't living before. And hold on, let me move you all because you're in the corner. Okay. So why do we consider mental health a rights issue? Why is it a human rights issue and not necessarily just an issue around access to mental health care or access to mental health care services? It's because there's underlying determinants that create circumstances where people are in situations of distress. And so we're looking at people's rights as citizens. For example, thinking of the right to freedom from discrimination. Roma communities experience a lot of discrimination in different European countries. And me here in Spain, yesterday, for example, I went to an NGO was doing a presentation of a book, and the experience of discrimination that they were talking about was generations of discrimination and how the perception of being a second-class citizen. So the violation of rights becomes a mental health issue as well. We're also looking at social rights. So for example, the progress in scientific knowledge right now, for example, from the university perspective, the way that we're doing research and talking about communities can either violate people's rights by not including them in the process of defining their realities, or we can incorporate, or we can violate that right. And so constructing knowledge, for example, is a very important social right that humans have. And the moment that that is violated, we're violating someone's right to mental health as well. And this is true for economical rights that I'm sure that all of us who have experience working or living and colleagues from ethnic minority backgrounds or migrant backgrounds or religious minority backgrounds, we know that there's difficulty in accessing work, owning your own property, and living in contexts that are quite marginalized, difficult to access, for example, the city center and other spaces where people are recognized as right holders. And this aspect of recognition is really important. In psychology, we call it mattering. So how we all feel like we matter is really important for our mental health. From a young age, when we have a parent, a sibling, a teacher, people who look at us and say, you matter, you count, I'm recognizing you. That's a way of protecting someone's mental health. And so we're talking about the protection of rights through the recognition of someone as a human. And so a little bit about before presenting the framework, where I hope that the framework is just a way for us to have a dialogue and shift the way maybe, or categorize the way the things that we're seeing, the things that we're dealing with the communities we're serving, whether it's more advocacy work, whether it's more community-based work, whether it's mixed, is how I'll share how we developed this white paper. So we were contacted by my research team, CESPID, which I'll probably name quite often, my home. CESPID was contacted by colleagues from the Open Society Foundation they wanted to understand non-medical approaches to mental health. So they wanted to understand, what are the contextual factors? What are the political factors? What are the scientific factors? What's happening in the general population that's violating people's mental health, what's happening there. And so they brought together a consortium of a team from Ukraine who was looking at the political determinants. So what are the policies and legislations related to mental health and mental health of Roma in Ukraine? There were colleagues in Italy who were working in settlements in Italy, looking at youth's experiences around living in a settlement and kind of how it's institutionalized a settlement within the city and difficult for people to escape from that. Because of the discrimination they perceive outside of the settlement. And then colleagues from Germany and Czech Republic were reviewing the trauma from generations and generations of Sinti and Roma communities in both these countries. And in Spain, what we did was organize all this information. And also we took a look at what was the literature saying? What do we know about mental health? What do we know? We didn't want to call it mental illness. We want to call it psychological distress and psychological well-being. This is because of what I was saying before, that this isn't about stigmatizing someone because of the distress that they're experiencing, but understanding that it's a normal reaction to a distressful situation, not someone's incapacity. And so we looked at the literature to see what they were saying about discrimination as an issue and how discrimination was either creating psychological distress, but we also wanted to look at what are the protective factors. What is, because a community, of course, I don't want to romanticize by any means any sort of marginalization, but there are protective factors. There are factors that of resilience that people, that communities exercise over generations that protects them from the discrimination, although that's a vicious cycle, no? But when we were looking at the literature, we saw, of course, psychological distress related to substance abuse. So people were drinking alcohol, but that's a way of also numbing very terrible situations. And so flipping on our head what we think of, oh, someone has an addiction, we need to fix this addiction. It's no, we need to look at what's happening in this person's life that's pushing and offering the only way to address it through, for example, alcoholism or other type of substance use. And I think that, for example, in this, you can take from other examples outside of the literature, even just reading the news, for example, of youth and social media and the anxiety and suicide cases that are increasing because of this, abnormal way now of online bullying or different. So it's not that kids have a problem using their phone, it's the contextual factors that are driving that distress. And then there's the other flip side as well, where there are, oh, hi, Zoran. You popped on my screen in the sky. There's also indicators of psychological well-being as well. We saw this with colleagues that were looking at settlements in Italy, I think it was outside of Rome, how not leaving the settlement in a way was a way to protect and find well-being and having social support, because right outside of the community, they would not experience any social support. But of course, this is in English, we say a double-edged sword. No, on one hand, family identity and social support is super important, but the source of that is also complete isolation from life outside of a settlement, for example. So we took a look at what our colleagues were finding on the ground with different organizations, what they were looking at politically, and we wanted to see what the literature was saying to support this broader idea of psychological well-being in distress. And with this, we created a framework, and I'm just going to share the large visual, and I'll go into each dimension little by little. So when we're looking at mental health from a human rights approach, we're looking at the different civil rights, political rights, economic rights, and cultural rights of, in this case, we were working specifically looking at Roma mental health and looking at anti-Gypsyism and discrimination. And so we defined mental distress in this context as disturbances of thought, emotion, behavior, and relationships with others that lead to suffering and functional impairment in one or more major life activities. And so here, we're social psychologists, and the way that we look at individuals is not only their individual experience, but also their interpersonal experiences and the larger, broader structural experiences that affect the individual and the community. And so at the individual level, taking what the literature and what our colleagues in the consortium were saying was this experience of transmitted trauma, similar to the example I gave of the book presentation last night of the transmitted trauma that Roma communities in this case experience, and how over time it's interiorized, where people believe that they deserve, or that is the situation, and assume that that's the situation. And, this is manifested in feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, tired, no reason to imagine anything different. There's also a second dimension, which is exclusion from social spheres. So, for example, the community that I've been working with and serve is about 10 minutes by car from my house, but 45 minutes by public transport. And that's just a small example of exclusion from social spheres. No, a lot of the women I work with who work in the city center have to wake up every day at 5 a.m. To make sure that if the bus doesn't show, they'll be on time for work, because of also the fear of missing work and losing a job and not getting there on time. And so I always find the image of a bus to be such a tangible way of thinking of exclusion, because it's the way to get to work, it's a way to come to the city center, it's a way to leave a community that's completely abandoned, and how that causes stressor in everyday life, and not knowing if the bus is coming, not knowing when you leave, why leave, because everyone looks at you and treats you differently. And then there's the structural aspect of this as well. So different political, contextual factors that are influencing someone's exclusion and someone's interiorization of this experience of discrimination. And so our idea of mental health distress, which I'll go into these three different layers in the next couple of slides. But then I also want to talk about Roma mental well-being. So we define it as a state of well-being in which the individual can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and contribute to the community. And I think throughout the presentation, although we'll focus for a bit on distress, I think it's important to look at the way that we're defining well-being as well, because well-being doesn't just mean it's not just about an individual, just like the distress isn't as well. We're talking about someone understanding that their experience is unfair and having critical awareness and having the right social support system and network to be able to respond to the injustices. And so I'll share with you different strategies that we've worked on to move from this critical awareness, but also building the networks to support people to advocate for changes in their community. And this goes back to the definition I said earlier about mattering, feeling recognized, feeling important, and how that translates to different levels as well when thinking of well-being. So I think there as well on the slide under Roma mental well-being is feeling of being recognized and influential. And this is extremely important for humans to feel important, to feel like they're recognized in their immediate family, but also as well in larger political discussions, in our in our work lives, in our school lives, in our family lives, feeling like we matter and that we're recognized and influential. And so I'm going to go into each one of these. So I'll start with we'll go from this journey. We'll go from structural discrimination all the way through transformative multi-level changes. And I prepared a couple of examples. Once we get from structural discrimination to here, I'll share an example of the Anda Romi project and thinking of this training, how I was observing all three of these happening and how it was impacting a lot of the girls through the comments that they were saying to me, to their teachers, to their colleagues, or to their peers. And then as well as looking at the 3 dimensions of Roma mental well-being. And then I'll provide an example before we get into kind of the strategies from research that we're doing that hopefully will be useful for you all. And so the first, starting from the left to the right of the model is structural discrimination. And here I've prepared a couple of questions to help think through structural discrimination. For example, well, first the definition is when we're talking about structural discrimination with Roma communities, we're specifically talking about anti-Gypsyism as a historically constructed racism against social groups identified as Roma or other terms as well. And this, for us, it means stigmatizing, homogenizing, attributing different types of characteristics to an entire group. And also discriminating social structures and violent practices that reproduce structural disadvantages, which I think that there's so many examples within healthcare, within employment, within educational systems, within neighborhoods, that we can see how social structures replicate time and time again to practices and contexts that reproduce a poverty cycle and a injustice cycle where a lot of not only Roma, but other communities experience distress. And so, for example, some questions that we can look at are, do Roma face inferior treatments due to racial prejudice and negative beliefs? Do Roma often suffer verbal or physical abuse? So for me, this question, I think a lot about my colleagues from a Roma NGO, Roma Women, talking about when they go shopping in the city center, how one of my colleagues, she's Roma, but she says she doesn't look Roma. And the other colleague, she says she looks Roma. And so she says that her experience when she goes into a shop is so different than her other colleagues because her other colleague is blonde and blue eyes, and she has dark hair and dark skin. And she's gone into stores before where police are following her around. And she talks about how uncomfortable and horrible that experience is when you're just trying to go shop for your daughter's sweater for school. And so these are things that cause distress and fear of going into a store. So we were looking at just someone's symptoms, no, they don't want to leave their house, that we would be missing so many other factors that experience someone not going somewhere, in this case. As well as are Roma denied healthcare and access to social or other services. Here in Sevilla, for example, well, in Spain, ever since the lockdown, a lot of public services became available online, but you have to have a certain digital certificate that is so complicated to download. The university even provides capacity building for the researchers and professors who I use Zoom and programs and softwares all the time. And if I don't know, I look it up on YouTube, but this is impossible. Like, I've looked at YouTube videos, I finally have it, but I had to go to the university to help me. And I consider myself pretty digitally capable in that way, digitally skilled, like a mid-level. And a lot of the services and a lot of Roma NGOs have started to support Roma communities and accessing digital certificates to be able to access any sort of government benefits, healthcare, citas, appointments. Girls, for example, or youth who didn't go to school because online schooling. And why? Because the different phone services don't put Wi-Fi in Roma communities. And so we're looking at how the way we access services and our capabilities, and not being able to access a 800 euro government support for having 3 children, 2 with disabilities, not being able to access that because you don't have a digital certificate, the amount of distress that causes a family and a mother of where will they eat tomorrow. And that leads to the second part, which is the exclusion of social spheres. And what this means is that there's a rejection and a lack of participation from different fields. And I think a little bit of what I explained earlier with the bus. So for example, does social inclusion enhance Roma identity and exclusive interactions with Roma people? In this situation, for example, a lot of the girls that we're working with have not left their neighborhood in years. They don't leave their neighborhoods, and they only interact with the social interactions that they have in their school and after school and on TikTok in the middle of the night. And how does this contribute to marginalization? And so those are the types of questions that we ask when we're thinking of mental health and human rights. For example, girls are on TikTok, which in a way you would think, well, at least they have freedom of expression, but that's not the case. The girls are on TikTok all night, then they're at school, and then at school they're sleeping. And so now we have this whole other situation that's causing exclusion of social spheres, when also digital could be a way of expanding your social spheres if not only you know, but also if you're in a context where you're shared that that's the way to use your digital. For example, us being connected from different countries on a Zoom is a way of expanding our social spheres and exchanging information. And then the third component of the human rights-based framework for mental health is transmitted trauma and interiorized oppression. And this means that social trauma and conflict displacement damage communities for generations. Roma mental and physical health, well-being, satisfaction with life, or quality of life are deeply influenced by scars of the past, historical injustice, racism, slavery, land appropriation. For example, here in Sevilla, the community the neighborhood I work is called Polígono Sur, and Polígono Sur was actually government housing that was built while Sevilla started expanding in the 70s. And when the city center began to expand, Roma were displaced to these government housing, and still the way that they interact with Triana, which is the what used to be the Roma neighborhood, the way that the relationship to that is such a way of, that's where actually when tourists come, they go to Triana to go listen to flamenco music. And so it's interesting because although that there's Roma flamenco there, usually where you'll find a lot of the music is in Polígono Sur, hidden away from the tourism. And so it's interesting to see how the displacement of a neighborhood from 50 years ago continues to shift how people are relating with the city center, and how does that change the conditions of an entire community, and also the type of stigma that they experience. And in the long term, which I hear it with the girls, which is incredible to me to hear 11, 12-year-old Roma girls talk about feeling worthless, and why even try to leave when it doesn't matter. And so this idea of a child dreaming of a future or thinking of a future or thinking of possibilities is so palpable at a young age. Because of generations and seeing your mother, seeing your grandmother, seeing your great-grandmother go through no escape. And so here, like I said, I was going to share examples of how I see these three dimensions play out in my work right now with Roma adolescent girls between 10 and 14 years old at a high school, at a middle school, high school in Polígono Sur, and this neighborhood where families had been displaced. If we're looking at the dimension of structural discrimination, for example, we see that there's very poor neighborhood conditions. The government housing is completely destroyed in so many ways. There's been no accountability from the local government. There's no programs available for Roma youth. There have been different organizations that have started to play soccer or football. Flamenco music, but a lot of times it's always the same type of programs that don't necessarily provide opportunities in a way to change the neighborhood. And a little bit of what I said before, the regional government and Spain in general has invested so much money in tourism ever since the pandemic. Right now, Sevilla is full of tourists. And when tourists come, they want to see Roma art and flamenco music, and eat tapas and go listen to flamenco music. And it's really interesting. It almost reminds me of in the United States with African Americans, Black Americans who play basketball, and the teams are owned usually by white American men. And it kind of feels like the same here in Sevilla, where we're seeing a lot of girls, women, men sharing their art and sharing their and flamenco dancing and singing, but all in the eyes of a tourist. And so these neighborhoods, people aren't going to the neighborhoods to listen to flamenco. Roma are leaving the neighborhoods to go to the bars where there's tourists to dance and sing and share their art. And so there's this relationship with the rest of the city that feels wrong in a lot of ways, and using people and abandoning them. And sometimes NGOs play a tricky role there as well. So promoting flamenco, promoting art, but how can we promote it not to be utilized by others? And because at the end of the day, what we see relating this to mental health is that a lot of times the flamenco dancers and singers, when they reach a certain age, or there's a new person, they're just left and abandoned. And a lot of times we see different mental health issues emerge because of that abandonment. But back to the girls, one of the things that we're seeing is that there's also so many limiting expectations around it. The schools, the NGOs, it's like, when the girls, that's, they just can't do anything else. They want to be hairdressers, they want to have a nail salon, but that's all they're going to have. And so let's just give them what they're going to have. And a lot of the girls are frustrated. I remember last week, one said to me, Daniela, I want to be a lawyer, but it doesn't matter because I'm never going to be a lawyer. I'll probably just have I'm just going to get married. And by the time I'm 16, I'll have a child and I'll never be a lawyer. And she said this to her friend, goes, of course, you're never going to be a lawyer. I was listening to these two young girls telling each other how, of course, they were never going to get anywhere. How silly. Let's just stay here. And we're talking about this exclusion, from social spheres and opportunities that offer different possibilities to feel strong, to feel capable, to feel worthy. This, like, seeing these young girls already understand that they're not worthy is horrible. It's heartbreaking. It's horrible. And also how they assume this to be true, but also not. Because they have a teacher who was reprimanding, telling them to be quiet. And one of the girls told another, her friend, she goes, why do white people hate us all the time? So I was listening to this, this is a young girl already see this injustice. No, I mean, it was a teacher telling them that they had to be quiet, that they couldn't talk, but just the girl already understanding that this is what's happening. Let me see how I am on. Okay, I think I'm good on time. And now if we're traveling outside of the mental health distress part of the framework, and now looking more on like what can we do before we go into more the practical aspects that I'm excited to share with you is, so we go from structural discrimination, exclusion of spheres, transmitted trauma, now to critical awareness. So we're looking at the individual, at the person, what awareness, what does their daily experiences mean? What strengths do they have? So what does critical awareness and strength mean? This is understood as a first step in the journey towards becoming politically active. So being recognized, seeing that you matter, and a way to support people in understanding their life stories and where their sources of injustice and what role and what support are needed to change it. And some questions to ask around critical awareness and strength is, does the community make meaning of their daily experiences? So, for example, are the girls asking themselves questions about their neighborhood, the trash in the neighborhood, the lack of other types of opportunities outside of becoming a hairdresser, for example, because that's the only program that's there for the girls. Our communities, for example, identifying where their rights are being violated. So we talk a lot about legal empowerment as well. I know Borjan and Zoran work in what is like the legal empowerment of communities, and that'll take us later to accountability of political level. Do people feel connected to other people's stories? So are these young girls, for example, seeing themselves represented by their peers, and how that can help in telling a group story? So it's not as isolating. So it's not as feelings of depression because you're seeing yourself connected, this idea of peer support in a lot of ways. And do they recognize strengths in the community? For example, here yesterday in the book presentation, this Roma woman activist lawyer was saying how Roma have told their stories through oral expression for generations. And so this immense capacity to tell stories, not written, but told, and how that's been so important for her advocacy work as a lawyer and as an activist. And I had never really thought of that in that way. And I thought it was an interesting way to identify strengths, to say, I matter. The second component, traveling towards the structural changes, is building networks and capacity to respond. And this means identifying support and allies in the community, not only from Roma to Roma, but for organizations, local public officials, religious groups, in my case, researcher. And this involves doing community organizing. So it's not just about peer support, but also how can we expand that and find support in other places that have the resources to support, in this case, mental well-being, or the support of youth, elderly, and build real relationships where people feel protected. And some questions to develop this are there others doing similar work? Are there sensitive providers? Maybe not the whole care system, but maybe there's a nurse, or there's a director of the healthcare center, or a mediator, one person that can help support any of the initiatives, or a school teacher. And what are the valuable resources? For example, here, the evangelical church is very important. And so a lot of the things we do, we have to contact the church, and not for all, because for some girls, they don't want the evangelical church, but it's a way of including those places that also matter to the community, not only the ones that matter politically, but also the ones that matter to the community. And finally, all of this to say from, you know, gaining critical awareness of the situation, finding the support, is now we're thinking of advocacy. So how can we tell a story? How can we mobilize? And how can we now take action that people feel strong and capable and recognized and supported to change at different levels? So it's not just about, when we're thinking of mental health, a lot of times people think of one-on-one therapy, and that's great and okay, and of course very necessary. But when we're looking at communities that are experiencing such high levels of distress, it has to go hand in hand with advocacy and work that is addressing relationships, but also organizations, also finding change in the community, and especially at the institutional level and having support. And a lot of times, at least in my experience, which I'm curious to hear from you, I have a couple of questions after this part, how I've seen for myself, for my peers, for my colleagues from the community, how being involved in advocacy work really had an impact on the mental health of feeling like I am capable. I do have support. I can leave my community, but also they can come to my community, feeling recognized in that way, and finding small changes in their neighborhood and how that's really helped the distress that was causing, even just a little. And so taking this back and kind of closing the circle of the example that I brought today with the Anda Romi project, is the way that we're working and the types of strategies that we're implementing. We're trying to promote that critical awareness. So, you know, the girls sharing their experiences with each other, having time to just be a girl and think of what their dreams are, what are their expectations, whether it's marriage and a child, or whether it's a hairdresser or a lawyer, or finishing high school or finishing the university, just having time to think and share with one another is very important, even if it's just 1 hour on a Thursday. But they know that every Thursday they have a space for them to talk about their issues, that peer support. And also doing strategies to make sure we're building networks to where this isn't just a strategy we implement with an NGO, but that when the NGO and the research funding has ended, the girls have a network that they can count on and rely on in the long term. And so we also, you know, are working with connecting them to other women in the neighborhood, taking them to the city center, taking them to the university to have lunch, taking them outside. And so building networks where they feel like they matter and they're important in, you know, the cafeteria of the Faculty of Psychology at the University of Sevilla now knows that if 10, 12-year-old girls from the Roma community come and have lunch, that they are welcome there, that they matter, that this is a place for them. And that provides a source, one resource of well-being, even if it's just for a couple of days. And the work that we're doing is also all to do advocacy. So we're doing a lot of research, but mostly to also see what is it that the mothers and the daughters want to change in their neighborhood to make sure that girls have the opportunity to flourish, no? To have a life where there's opportunities, where they're not isolated, where discrimination doesn't become something that they believe, but something that they challenge, and working, using advocacy, the process of advocacy, as a way to support mental health. And I want to stop sharing because I would like to just chat, because I feel like I'm a radio host right now. And I would just love to hear, looking at this model and thinking through this, how do you see, is it helpful in organizing the way and the feelings that you've had as people from organizations that are working with different communities? And also, I know, for example, Borjan's work is very linked to advocacy. And so I'm wondering if looking at advocacy as a way to support mental health and well-being, if you've personally have all maybe seen that, or have you seen it cause more distress or more well-being? Yeah. So I wonder if we can maybe chat for 15 minutes and then we can go to the next.
Daniela, I have shared a question with you. There was a question in the chat. Also, feel free, everyone, to ask questions, or if you need some clarification from the presentation before, and also provide input to the questions that Daniela already shared with you.
Can I start?
Yes.
Yes, thank
Let's
you for
let's first Daniela answer the question in the
Um,
chat, then we can.
Okay.
I believe the stereotype phenomenon. That question. Yes. Yes, I definitely
No,
think.
sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, sorry for interrupting. I now can talk with you. It's not about. First of all, my name is Miloš Vladić. I came from Montenegro. I'm in front of Psychological Association of Montenegro, and I have more or less than 10 years working with Roma community here in Montenegro in various NGOs. So my question is not a question, it's more like a statement. It's not, we talk about not about stereotype, we talk about phenomena, stereotype threat. In psychological, social psychology, we have that kind of phenomena, and that's what I hear from your presentation, and thank you for your presentation. But also we have a different how can I say, different themes we can see during your presentation. But I heard one of them was a stereotype threat, especially when we talk about Roma community, but also we can talk about various marginalized community and vulnerable groups.
Absolutely. No, I think that happens a lot. No, there we have a lot of words for the same phenomenons and situations, and I think that are you referring to when I was talking about not wanting to leave the neighborhood because feelings of being stereotyped, no? And how at the end of the day it kind of is just a cycle. No, I don't leave because I don't want to feel threatened for being seen or perceived a certain way and discriminated. And so I stay where I feel comfortable and safe and supported.
More or less, my thoughts is when, for example, you said that in UNS, USA, you have a game player that they have different, how can I say, to be more precise, different color skin, how can I say? And for example, people think for Roma that they can only like you said, they can only be haircut, they can only work as a singer or something like that. But some majority assume that what minority can do, and that's why I want to refer. When somebody go outside from their community, majority think, okay, you can do only that and nothing more. And it's very important to understand. Yeah.
I know. It reminds me of, oh no, it's perfect. It reminds me of, I don't know from what country did this, but I think it was a group of activists, like young Roma activists, maybe in 2018, 2019. They did a campaign to say, no, I don't have flamenco in my blood. I don't dance flamenco. Because a lot of times they say, just because I'm Roma doesn't mean that I dance flamenco. And I'm not Roma, I'm Latina, and people think I can dance. Oh, like you're Latina, you can dance salsa. I'm like, I can't dance salsa. I'm terrible at dancing salsa. You know, it's very similar in the way of like just assuming because you're from, then you can do that and only do that. And I know, and I remember, if I can find it, I'll send it to you all, but it was a video of Roma youth saying, I'm a scientist, I'm this, I'm that. I don't dance flamenco. And yeah, it's not only about what people think they're capable of, it's also the expectations and kind of like the glass ceiling, no, of this is what I think you can only do this, and so you believe that you can only do that. And yeah.
Christina, you can go.
Thank you. Where did I stop? Oh, I was congratulations on Daniela for the presentation. It was excellent. It was very thorough, and it gave us a very good view in your work and something that is very similar to all Roma communities. And that's stigma and structural discrimination. It is something that is very unique about the Roma community, because it doesn't matter in which country they are settled. It's the same problem that they are coping with, such as discrimination, stigmatization, and other rights that are, and also the psychological distress. But there is also some advantages which are related to the country that they are settled. As an example, our community, Roma community, it has a very good advantage in our city because it's located 10 minutes from the city center. So they don't have that barrier, as you said, with traveling and poor transportation and segregation about that. They are also, I was just taking notes as you were speaking. I have one question, but I'll ask at the end of my speaker. Yes, as I said, they also had problem with equality before the law. It is something that is also the same in our country too. Discrimination, poor living condition. I think that they are active in the political rights, and also they have some barriers with social rights. I'm here, okay, just my laptop had something problems. Also, when it's about the psychological distress, I have, I think, because it's my assumption from the work that I'm doing with the Roma community 7 years now, it is something that is more, how can you say, it's more foreseen in the women, in the Roma women, and they also connected with depression, because when they come to our office, he says, yes, I have a depression. Can I have your medical examination? It doesn't say depression. It says psychological stress and everything else, but it doesn't say depression. And they are connected that distress with depression, but it's something very different. It's not similar. Borjan can add here something from his point of view, but I think that there are also misconceptions about mental health. There's a lack of knowledge about their mental health, especially in these communities, especially Roma communities, which is also related with the poor quality of life. When we speak about substance use, I think that it's also very related with the gender. It's on the high level with the Roma men rather than the Roma women. But psychological stress is also more presentable to the Roma woman rather than Roma men. It's something my point of view. Maybe it's not. I'm not right. I'm just saying. As I said, the location of the Roma communities advantage that has in our town because it's, as I said, it's near to the central town. There's also a school in their community. So, but there's also a segregation also with the education. We have also very good access to services such as internet. And also they have to manage even in the online learning. They have to manage because there was a lot of organization that helped them bring tablets and other services for them to continue their education. For housing condition, as I said, because they are living in settlements that are not registered in the and they cannot be legalized upon the detailed urbanized plan, because also there are some part of their settlements that are under the cultural protection of our country. So that's something that is very low. How can I say? It is against the law because you cannot register this settlement because it's under cultural protection of the state. So it is something that it cannot be easy. They don't want to move to the other places, but country cannot legalize their settlement. So it's something.
Right.
Yes. Sorry for my.
So, yeah, no, I understand because there's similar situation here in Sevilla as well.
Yes. So also I said, yes, segregation, we have that also in our country. And also I wanted to ask you about, this is my two questions. You said digitalization of public services. I don't think that's something that will be a benefit for our communities, because they have mobile phones, they have access to internet, but also these services are very hard in our country because they are also had problem with the pages, they are not working, you have to pay online, and etc. And it's something that is hard for all the people, but especially for marginalized community. How do you think that will help marginalized community in their access? And also in the beginning of your presentation, you said about the relation mother-daughter, and you mentioned early child marriages. Do you think that it is connected through tradition or through religion? Thank you.
Oh, those are all really good questions. Thank you so much. Those are so thoughtful. And I want to go back for a moment to, because I think as well, we don't have it. We have a lot of narratives, but we haven't analyzed on a deeper level. But for us as well, we see that women experience such high levels of psychological distress, Roma women. And I think similar, no, where there's just, here's a prescription, here's a prescription, just, here there's so much ansiolíticos, like anxiety medication given to Roma women. And actually they did a study many years ago, but I'm sure that it's still the same, that, the neighborhood with high Roma communities is where the most prescribed anxiety medication is. And a lot of it is women. And so we also have had the same observation. And what I know from focus groups and conversations with my colleagues who experience a lot of stress in this way because of the family life, because of the context, that it's just the responsibilities that the women have to a lot of times protect their children from the context, feeling like there's no way out, the issue with money. I have 20 euros today, but I don't know what I'll have in a week. And a lot of times what I see, and also this is biased because I work with a lot of women, what I hear as well is that, they do everything and it's so hard. And a lot of times, the reason a lot of times they do everything as well is that a lot of the partners or husbands are trying to find work and also dealing with their own mental health distress. And so a lot of times the mothers are the ones that are playing, and this is a generalization from the things I hear and listen to, is that they take on a lot of responsibilities. And I'm going to tie that with the mother-daughter. So for us, what we were seeing when we were working with, first we started working with women, and they told us how important, they wished that when they were 10 or 11, someone would have asked them about other possibilities. And so really we started working with girls because the women said, no one ever told me that there were other possibilities or even asked me what I like. And so we developed the program with our partner organization, GILO, who are all Roma mothers and caretakers. And they were saying, but we can't just work with the daughters. We worked with the daughters. We worked with girls at school. And then we realized we can't work separately. It's not about working with the mothers. And then we have to also work together. And so the mothers there's not a lot of literature around mothers and daughters in general, but I'm a daughter, I have a mother. I also, watching my friends with their mothers and my colleagues in Roma communities as well, mothers play an important role in family dynamics when it comes to transmitting values, and values can be traditions, values can be religious, values can be, and it's interesting because a lot of the mothers will say, I want my daughter to go to university, or I want my daughter to have a child and go to university. And at the same time, sometimes that same mother is telling her daughter to get married. And so I think that the mother-daughter, it's interesting because I think as they're asking their daughters to question, the daughters begin to question the mother. And so I think that I think a lot of times as a non-Roma, and the non-Roma type of literature and narratives tie it to culture and tradition. But I think a lot of times it's a little bit of both and a protective factor. And having more children is having more human resources. Having children and being married is expanding the family structure and expanding the support system. I think sometimes it can be hidden as a religious mechanism, and sometimes it's a traditional mechanism, but I don't know. I don't think it's either or. I think it maybe depends on the family. So yeah, I don't know if that answered. I'm still thinking through these things because it's still things that we're working on. And then the digitalization of public services, I think right now it's a disaster. Like, I think our websites are starting to work, but it's not that great. Spanish is my second language, and I read, I work in a university, so I use Spanish a lot. I'm bilingual, but it's very difficult to navigate, even if you know Spanish or you don't know Spanish, or if you do it on your mobile phone, it's impossible. And a lot of Roma families only have a mobile phone, not a computer. The digital certificate to access healthcare centers is impossible, and it fails and it doesn't work. And so what happens is that in the primary healthcare centers where Roma, in the Roma neighborhood, is a long line waiting to get an appointment, and it's impossible to get an appointment. Then the people at the healthcare center hate it. They go to your computer. They're like, I don't have a computer. Well, go on your phone, but leave, and then it's just like promoting that same stereotype. And so I think that if digitalization isn't done sensitively and slower, I think that it'll be very destructive. It's my opinion.
Thank you. Borian, you have some questions or comments?
Yeah, mostly comments, let's say, but maybe a question will emerge as well. I mean, what really, because I have participated on other trainings which Daniela and her colleagues delivered, and it's always I find them inspirative, definitely, that the problems of the Roma, also Christina mentioned, are almost the same. What Daniela described in Spain, you can literally transfer it to Skopje, because Roma live in a segregated municipality of Shutorizali, which is on the outskirts of the city. Although it's a capital city, it doesn't look anything like the rest of the city. The problems with the bus, the problems with coming them to the city center, as you said, all the other issues are very relevant for the Macedonian context. But it's really, for me, it's always your presentation of your work should intrigue us to explore more how these issues affect the mental health of Roma. Because mainly, most of our organizations, we are addressing certain issues. Yes, they don't have access to primary healthcare, and we work on that. The buses are not regular in Shutorizali, and we work on that. But somehow we don't always, or very rarely, address how this impacts on the mental health of Roma. And this is, I think, very, very important, at least for me and probably for other organizations, to think through how these issues are impacting the mental health of Roma. And what is particularly that I wanted to say was that you asked about the engagement of Roma communities in advocacy and their impact on mental health. It's really another interesting question which is raised on this workshop, and I'm really glad that you raised it. I really haven't thought so much about it, but as you said, when first of all, from our experience, from our work, we were working for almost 15 years on advocacy, social accountability in Roma communities, and especially, again, I'm speaking mostly for Skopje and this segregated Roma municipality inside the city. It's very difficult to take Roma people outside, bring them in the city center, and do some advocacy work. It's very, very difficult. And even without empowering them first, teaching them about the rights and entitlements, educating them, offering them paralegal assistance and everything. After a few years of empowerment of Roma communities, we were able to conduct very successful advocacy activities in the Roma communities themselves. And what I have witnessed, because also we were working mainly with women, because our priority is women reproductive health and health of mother and children. I have really witnessed on these local advocacy events how the Roma women are really confident to oppose to the health workers or to some health authority that for the injustices that they are facing and the services that they are not getting. So it's really somehow empowering them. Probably we have never investigated that, but when you see such a woman which is really poor and undereducated and everything, and she stands up and speaks, confronts openly the health authority in their own community, I really hope that this really empowers her as a person, and has potential impact on her mental health, which should be definitely explored. It's a little bit more difficult to take out them, as I said, and bring them to the city center, but we also did that through the empowerment, but you cannot bring a greater group. Still, there are just some individuals which will come and do some advocacy work in the city center, even in the Ministry of Health, or on the press conference and everything, but still you need for previous work in the community for empowerment and issues like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes I feel, for example, around, if I think of advocacy from mental health point of view, it's interesting because a lot of times, for example, right now with the young girls, sometimes it just feels like a women's group. No, we're talking about the neighborhood, we're talking about rights, we're talking about discrimination, we're talking about opportunities, possibilities. But a lot of times it's maybe the only place for some of them to have a friend. One of them didn't want to go. She didn't want to be part of the sessions, and now she's the first one there every day, every week. And it's, I always think it's like a sign that she has 9 brothers and sisters, and it might be the only place where she gets to be a protagonist, the only place where she gets to, in psychology, we call it matter. And so it's interesting when you put a mental health lens on advocacy, empowerment, like what does that do and change and look like for people?
Daniela, I would like to share something about Macedonia. Probably everyone knows that the most prescribed medication in the country is diazepam. So that's lead to the situation where we are, and especially the situation in general, not only in the Roma communities but also in the whole country. Especially the discrimination, yes, it's one of the points that can make mental distress or psychological distress. But however, there are other factors, social determinants that can easily influence not only Roma. Yes, they face lot of social determinants can influence on their mental health, but also for the general population in the country, especially when you access to healthcare services, even in the capital city, for example, in the country, and the type of care that you receive in the medical facilities. Also, the educational programs and access to educational services in the country it also can influence on your mental health. And about there are very big discrepancies even between among local and national level in the way of development and in the way of how different kind of social determinants can influence the mental health, but also discrepancies in the way of development of one country to another country, especially when we are talking about pushing about different kind of agendas, especially the digitalization is one of them. When on the global level, then they push on some developments, and you're not able to reach those developments that also limit you as a person and create some discomfort, and also can result with different kind of medical condition as a person. That's my like general opinion, but definitely I don't believe that now, especially after the COVID, that the mental health issues are pretty much dominant in not only among marginal, but also on the among everyone in the country, in Macedonia. Probably is the same with the rest of the countries.
Absolutely. Thank you. I agree with here. It's also, by the way, the diazepam and lorazepam. All the PAMs are very, very highly prescribed in Spain as well. And regarding the digitalization, I also agree. I think a lot about the girls right now, and if there's nothing in the neighborhood, the best thing to do is, you know, they tell us they go after school, they go home, help make lunch, clean up lunch, sleep until 11 p.m., get on TikTok all night, and then they go to school and they're tired. And TikTok is where they connect, but who are they connecting with? You know, it's like a whole new form of marginalization, no, in a lot of ways, especially when there's no other options. You know, in my neighborhood, I see the kids go to after school English program, after school soccer program, after school. And by the time 10 p.m.s, they're not on TikTok, they're sleeping. And so it's interesting how digitalization is being so glorified in so many ways. And when it is being looked at as a risk, it's blaming individuals. It's like, no, how do you use your phone? How do you use TikTok? But then I say, well, then you're just blaming individuals instead of looking at the wider context, and digitalization is going to do that and it is affecting people's mental health, especially in marginalized communities, because there's a whole other layer, multiple layers. But I think it's obvious how mental health is you know, being, and recently we had a master student who's doing his work around and digital anti-gypsyism. And so he did, like he went on Reddit, the forum, to see what people were saying. And it was just very discriminatory content. And they were like, imagine if you were just a 13-year-old Roma kid going into Reddit and you see this, how does that affect your mental health? You know, you just hate towards yourself from a phone, you know?
Yes. Maria,
I had that impression that we are all have similar issues within our countries regarding Roma community. I just want to say that when I was presenting the NGO Juventus and that we are providing direct support to specific communities, there's an overlapping between different communities. So, and there is overlapping between these communities and Roma community. So we have, I can say, about 30% of Roma community members within these communities, especially when we are talking about people who use drugs or people who are providing sex services. So I have to say that we are witnessing on a daily basis that there is a high rate of segregation and mental issues within this community, and we have problems regarding their approach to social protection services, to healthcare protection, employment agency in Montenegro, and we are dealing with that. We are going with them to specific institutions, organizations, because they have to have that kind of protection, and because they are part of these communities that I mentioned before that we are working with, they are discriminated more. And I have to say that we have similar problems in Montenegro with housing, with dropouts from elementary schools, with transportation to schools. So what is a light in all these problems is that we have several NGOs working specifically with community of Roma. And for example, we have one community whose executive director is from Roma community, and it's a woman. So it's a very, very important role model for young girls, and they have a licensed service within social and child protection system. It's a shelter for young girls dealing with early marriages. And that is very important service within Montenegro. But I think that all of us are dealing with some specific community, with some, we are providing specific services, but definitely in our country we need to have a bigger picture, to lobby for some changes that will give us changes regarding Roma community status in Montenegro. That's it for now.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Zoki.
Hi, Daniela. Hi, everyone. Mental health is very complicated condition. From this reason, we must understand the context. If we speak about the Macedonia, where Roma community is the most marginal, the most vulnerable, in that case, must understand first about what's happened in the field. We have a lot of disinformation, different statements from politicians, public authorities, people who making decisions like mayor, prime minister, minister, etc., etc. We have cases of oncology, bad health system, and nobody is punished. So people didn't trust to institution and to the system. In that case, Roma community is the most affected. And our job, because if we have some kind of project, one of them is about the first psychosocial aid and first psychological help, when the person first must understand what is situation and to make a schedule how to go forward, not to avoid the problem, to start to fight to better condition. I will give the case what's happened from last week. One 12-year girl from Delchevo escaped in Strumica, what is around 100 kilometers, and she go to another family. So we with the parents going to the police, to the center of the social affair, and after 3 days they have reaction. The police go there, try to take the girl without anyone from the center of the social affair, etc. Because girl crying, they decided it's better to stay in Strumica. We have law about the family, about the domestic violence, etc., etc. We have law how to work the social workers and psychology. In the Center for Social Affairs, they have protocol. They must do the profile. They must give psychosocial support. They didn't give anything, and nobody is punished. Again, I must to go to the police, and they say this is not in our area. I said this is area of North Macedonia, and your job is to go there to provide everything according to the law. In what condition is the Roma parents? They, from one side, they have institution, from other side, they have Zoran, like one of the leaders who is not a Roma, but is a Roma leader anyway, because he fight or he demand the rights of the Roma community. So it's very complicated. We didn't have good governance. We have law, but not effective. And we must, again, to make advocacy from one side to better implementation of the law and punishment for the institutions who didn't work. And from other side, people who are affected and have problems must to have much more self-confidence, to find what is the real information, not misinformation, disinformation, etc., and to understand the problem exists and must step by step with the environment around them to try to change something. Sorry if you take too much time.
No.
Thank you. Maybe we can continue because we have 30 minutes after the first session.
Okay.
And in the end,
Can
we
I
can also
ask
have.
something? Yes.
Eugen? Do you want to ask something?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So if we speak about the structural discrimination or institutional, how can be a definition? It's possible to have that because in Romania we started to speak about that dimension of the discrimination to be structural or institutional because it's in the few laws by European level, but it's not in the national level that even the definition or the name is like this. And I will ask that is the first question, how we can put the definition of that. And another, it's about the member of the Roma communities where they are proud to be inferior. They are okay with that, and they learn their kids to be like this, to be to be different from others and to be inferior. They teach them how to not have something to to request from others, just to accept what people in society give them. That is again mental issue problems. That's true. Thank you.
Thank you. I think if I understood the first question, it's how that there's no formal national definition to structural discrimination. I don't know, in our context in Spain, there's a Roma, some years ago, the national government developed a Roma state council, and where there's a lot of NGOs, and that NGO packed with different regional governments, legislation against anti-Gypsyism, led by NGOs at the national level. And that's been utilized in a lot of cases that were related to structural discrimination. But that was something that was led by organizations at the national level. And there's, of course, a lot of great things that have come from that, because there are legal terms that have been used to protect Roma rights, but then there has also caused other issues having a Roma State Council for smaller NGOs who aren't a part of maybe the more formal governmental structures. So there's a whole other set of barriers that comes, but there's also a legal commitment from different regional governments in terms of specifically anti-Gypsyism. And then the second question or comment, I think it's similar here in my experience, that a lot of times, and I think as women or as Roma, there's a lot of times that we're taught to be quiet or to not to act differently, so you know that you are one identity, and to differentiate yourself from someone else. And I think that that's just a form of generational protection, and a lot of times it's, stick to this identity because this is where you're going to be safe here. And so if you continue to act in this way or say in this way or not say anything, or walk, if you see a police, walk far away from them, those are types of learned behaviors that are usually taught in a form of protection, that also is not necessarily a parent's only responsibility, to teach them otherwise, because that's a way of protecting your child. I think that that's where an NGO or other activists can play an important role in supporting parents and children to break that cycle. I don't know if that kind of answered the questions.
Daniela, I have one question actually. For example, if you organize group sessions and support groups and so on, as you already mentioned, we are tending to involve the communities in our advocacy activities and also motivate them and provide them capacities to do that by their own. And at the end of the day, they are again facing some disappointments, some barriers because of the results of the advocacy process. We are facing as well as organizations who are dealing with it. But at the end of the day, they can. This process can also affect on their mental health.
Yeah.
Is it, for example, taking medication the final need or result that is to stop the problems, or there are any other types of maybe activities that can be applied?
I think that's a good question to also introduce the second part of the session, but I also have observed that where when we've been doing advocacy and there's moments where I've had a colleague say, I just don't see the point of this. Why are we doing this? Nothing's ever going to change. There's that cost is that people will get tired and not, and for us, it's really important to just start really, really small, because that's more activating than trying to do, we're going to end structural discrimination. It has to be something small and tangible. And because if not, it just does burn out. And I think that's true for all social movements as well, that I think you gain more long-term momentum when you start small, as opposed to going big and then being burnt out from all the energy that you put in. And we've had to deal with that a lot. And in those cases, there are our advocacy sessions to organize sometimes turn into a peer support group. And we don't do any advocacy that day, and we just have a beer and talk about everything that happened and how frustrating it is and what are we supposed to do. And I think that it's important also to have different types of people that are involved, because I think it's not just a community who's constantly violated the responsibility to take action. I think it's a group of people, which are the NGOs, the researchers, whatever other allies, because there's going to, if it's the community's responsibility to do all that, that's not fair. And then it's asking someone who's in the worst situation to have the most energy, and that's going to burn out very quickly. And so I don't know, for us, it's not having too much of a timeline, because that's not how it works. And people are exhausted and tired and disappointed, and it's frustrating, and it's years and years to do this. And so it's also just to assume that that's how it's going to be. And so I think that it has that's why it's important also, it's not just the researcher, just the NGO with the one community member. It has to be such a big group of people, because the funding ends. I can go because of my personal commitment to these group of women, but what happens when funding ends, or the NGO leaves, or then you're abandoning double, no? And so, yeah, good question. I always ask that myself. And if you want, I can go into the second part of which I think will be helpful to think through. And thank you. It was such stimulating, and I have a lot of things to think about still. Okay. So kind of linking it to, hold on, I want to see you all, because if not, I feel very weird. Okay. So the second part of the session is more the how. Like I was saying to you all, I work in the university, I'm a researcher. And so really we do research for the purpose of advocacy. And so the hows I'm going to share with you are different types of research strategies that are helpful in this, social support that organizations and researchers can provide while gathering evidence, while using that evidence with communities for advocacy. So although this may sound a little more research-based, it's really it can be translated to other types of programs and things that people are doing alongside communities. So before we were looking at the conditions of marginalization, and then on the other side, we were looking at conditions of justice that provides multi-level dynamic type of well-being in the long run. And so the goal of this session is to look at how can we transform mental health. So it's not just about the individual mental health or looking just at mental distress, but how can we transform mental health while we're changing conditions of marginalizations through advocacy for conditions of justice. And so this is just a small table to kind of think through the feelings and the psychological feelings that looking at advocacy can help. So we're looking at feeling confident, talking about how the women seemed confident when they were doing different talking to healthcare providers. Well, on an individual level, there's a sense of control, and humans needing a sense of control is important when we're talking about justice. It's I make decisions about my life because I have the resources and the opportunities to do so, and that gives us a sense of well-being. At the interpersonal level, working together, working in groups, working NGOs, researchers, policymakers, different types of people, instead of feelings of isolations, feelings of distrust and the discomfort that that causes, while we move towards how can we create an environment of social support and commitment. And then also on a citizenship level, feeling powerless when you don't have the paperwork, when you don't have the access to the service, feeling discriminated, similar to feeling, of hopelessness all over again. Well, how can we move towards a sense of belonging and using advocacy for not only fair labor conditions, but different types of housing conditions, healthcare conditions, for an overall sense of belonging to a community, a city, a regional setting, a country, a group of countries. And so how can we use research and advocacy to touch on all those levels and on all those emotions and on all those psychological components that justice can end up providing for us? And so our how, we do citizen science work, which is also community-based participatory action research, but lately, we've been really looking more at the citizen science research on how researchers' roles and NGOs' roles, all of our roles are really changing now that people are having more access to knowledge, spaces to talk about their experiences. We're talking about digitalization, talking about that now people can share their experiences, people are taking photographs, people are communicating on Telegram, on WhatsApp, on different ways. And so now we're thinking of how are we doing advocacy in our everyday life, not just in formal settings, but also in everyday settings. And so what does that mean for the way that we're working together, where it's, as a researcher, we're working with different types of social actors. It's not just the researcher and the target community, but it's also the other stakeholders in the local community. And we want to collect data. We don't want to say what data, but collect data with communities that define what data they want to collect, analyze it. So making meaning as well of data is a way of gaining knowledge, critical awareness, which we spoke about in the model. And how can we use evidence for advocacy? So it's not just evidence to stay within the evaluation of the NGO or just to stay in the evaluation of a university setting or for policymakers, but for people to have tangible ways of saying, you're violating my rights. I have this photograph, I have this survey, I have this information, and it's a way to gain power back. And it's also a way to reflect in community, to have critical dialogue, to build consensus, which is really important as well, and to take action. And so when we're doing citizen science and our work at CESPID is that we're really focused on centering community knowledge or local knowledge. There's a million different words for this. So our aim is to make sure that along every program or every research or every advocacy we're doing, that the communities are participating in every step of the way, and that this isn't linear, it's cyclical. So we collect evidence, maybe we do advocacy, then we evaluate, and then we start over again. So we're constantly in having moments for reflection as a group, and also moments for action and evaluating that action, and we continue on that way. And this way, we're making sure that communities' knowledge is valued. So we're saying your voice and your experience are important. This is super, for citizen science, there's this magic as well to focusing not necessarily on the target of advocacy, but the way that we're doing research, the way we're relating to people, the way we're being transparent. And so rebuilding that trust as well, and talking about privileges and situations of oppressions and discriminations and power. And we begin to shift how people end up relating to one another. So for example, we work with a lot of non-Roma students, and it's their first time to go into a Roma neighborhood, and that humanizing experience between a young 20-something-year-old non-Roma Spanish or Erasmus student that's here with us to engage and support and recognize the experiences of the women or the girls that are experiencing, in our case, extreme situations of marginalization. It's a way of saying, I'm here to support you, you matter. I'm sorry that this is what I thought. I was taught to think this way, and it becomes an exchange for peer support in a lot of ways. And also, I think it's important to know it's not just this extractive form of tell me all your stories, I'm going to go advocate. It's saying, no, let's build this together and let's go together to advocate for what matters to you. And so citizen science approaches create space to recognize community experiences, communities matter, build a supportive network, and also a way to commit to social change together. And so there's a constant feedback loop of recognition, a constant feedback loop of influence as well. It's community saying, this is what matters to me, and the rest of the team saying, if this is what matters to you, this is what we know as researchers, let's go in this direction. And in that way, it's more of a social change environment instead of research or advocacy in and of itself. It's more important the process that we do. And this changes a lot of our roles as a researcher. For me, for example, it's not just about accessing information or asking questions, and it's about reflecting with the community. It's about instigating questions and helping people think through things. It's facilitating conversations. I know for a lot of NGOs, there's a lot of mediation and advocacy that takes place, but it's also important to have those moments for reflection and to ask questions and for people to gather information about the questions that matter. And so it makes us expand our roles as partners, as people working alongside women or girls or all the different communities that we all work with. And so I'm going to share with you a couple of strategies that we implement in community partnerships. A lot of these are personal. No, it's my birthday, the women come to my birthday celebration, it's the first communion of one of my colleagues in the Roma neighborhood, we all go to the first communion, but then there's also things that we do together which are more focused on the research, but we also just build actual relationships with people because that's a source of well-being, having community, no? And so we build community together, but we also incorporate research as well. And so I'm going to share with you guys today the photo voice that we do, because I think I have a really good example that we did a few years ago that's in a Roma settlement, and it actually goes back to the questions we were talking about before, around Roma settlements and not leaving and the different threats and perceived threats outside of the community. And so we did a photo voice it's one of the oldest Roma settlements in Europe called Elvasie. So I'll share our experience doing this research advocacy work with a group of neighbors, and then how that culminated over the years into an exhibit where we were able to do a lot of advocacy and the different NGOs actually gained quite a lot more funding than usual from the local government to continue their work in their different organizations. Also, we've been talking about digitalization. So I also brought an example of storytelling and how can we use digital spaces as a way to center stories and give people recognition and that critical awareness of injustice through sharing experiences with other communities around the world that are bearing the burden of similar experiences. And community mapping, which I don't know, I think it's relevant in the sense of identifying what's happening in a community that's preventing or promoting well-being for communities. So the first example is Photo Voice. What is Photo Voice? I'm not sure. I'm sure I know Borjan and Sora know because I've shared with them our Photo Voice work before. But Photo Voice is a research tool that actually gives voice through photographs. It was developed in the 80s, I think it was, by a researcher who was also a photographer that thought that through images, she could support communities to tell their stories and use those photographs to advocate for better living conditions, especially with women who were not able to read or write. And so she thought that an image would be a great way to help people articulate their experiences. And Photo Voice is really dynamic because it's a way of people going out using their phones, especially everyone has a phone to take photographs of what they're seeing in their daily lives, having moments for reflection by themselves before going into a group and sharing what they saw and building knowledge together. And the aim of Photo Voice is to tell a group story and to use that for advocacy. And the Photo Voice process itself is really interesting because it helps, or at least what we've seen with different narratives, is that when we started with the photographs, by the time we were using the photographs for advocacy, a lot of the women had changed how they perceived themselves and their neighbors. They started by blaming and saying, well, we're Roma, we just live this way, we like to live in trash. And by the end of the process, they were saying, the city council doesn't have waste management in our settlement. And so you watch how through the research process, the story changed. So we go from the interiorized oppression to this critical awareness of what's happening. And so this is what's Photo Voice? Well, we take photographs, we sit and discuss the photographs, we code. So there's this process of research, qualitative research, which is you're organizing the information and making sense of the information. We categorize the photos, and so it's part of this, we have all this information and we're going to start reducing this to understand what is happening in our neighborhood. And then we develop recommendations. And so we start voting and building consensus of why one is more important than the other, which in the final part of my presentation, I'll show you by doing together how to do these types of activities that help people develop that sense of strength to say their opinions, their story, their experiences, to build consensus together about what's happening. And so this was over time, we did work with women and then with girls, but this is just kind of the 5 major steps of Photo Voice. But I wanted to share, because I thought it was maybe more relevant to see a clear example of this. So we did a Photo Voice in El Valle, which is a settlement in Sevilla that since the 90s, they've been trying to eradicate. They use the word eradicate. And a lot of the Roma communities that live in the Roma, this is next to a funeral home, a little bit outside of the city center. I think it's 200 and something Roma families. And since the 90s, and this is from 2008, but even last year, there was a different plans from different political parties within the city council that have planned to remove Roma families and put them dispersed throughout the city in government housing. And this was, very chaotic because a lot of the youth of a lot of the young people, primary school level, from the settlement have buses that took them to different high schools and different elementary schools around the city. But a lot of the times when we've interviewed teachers who work with the Roma children from the settlement, they always say, oh, they're lazy, they're always sleeping. If we're thinking of mental health, they have no friends, they only want to hang out with Roma. And so this is, I feel like, a good depiction of the impact of mental health, and also they've tried to eradicate the settlement. Well, they call it, like, in Spanish, like a displacement of families. But it's interesting because when they've removed homes and removed families, a couple of months later, the families will come back. And so this has been one of the things that we had been working on for a couple of years until the political party changed again. So it's like starting from zero. But we did a photo voice project with a group of neighbors from this neighborhood. And so I'm going to show you a presentation we prepared. It's in Spanish, but I'll just tell you, this is a presentation we prepared with the group of neighbors from El Valle to go to the local ombudsman and to the city council for advocacy. And so this is just a typical photo of the police officers in Sevilla and the Roma settlement and El Valle. You can Google El Valle and a lot of images like this will come up. And so this was the presentation we prepared. This is the group of neighbors that we worked with in advocacy, and this is their presentation that as researchers and the partner NGO, we just made the PowerPoint with them. And so this is the actual PowerPoint that was used for advocacy using the photo voice. And so they had different narratives that they had gathered from their neighbors, which I won't go into, but as part of this is in Spanish, I'm so sorry, but I didn't want to touch it because it's like the only copy I have. And so this is the introduction. And so I remember the neighbors were talking and introduced that what they wanted the objective was to improve the living conditions in El Valle, that they did not want to leave, they did not want to be reallocated, but that they wanted to have better living conditions and cleaner environments in El Valle. And so they were advocating for improved living conditions. And so you can see that through the photographs, in this photograph, this is a bunch of garlic. And there was this like violent fight between the neighbors because there was this one neighbor who was dumping all of this garlic out onto right next to the homes, and there was a huge violent outbreak. And they were discussing how, like, because nobody comes to clean up, we have more experiences of no support between neighbors. We get into fights all the time because no one's cleaning up, no one's taking care of this, but this isn't our fault. Like, look at the trash can that is the city government's, but they don't clean up anything that's outside of the trash can. This is another quote. The animals and insects, they were talking about how in their homes, in this photograph where you see the ceiling, this is rats were in the ceilings of the home, and this is actually urine from different rats. And they were discussing how they grew up just always having rats within the home, the different dogs and stray dogs and the different illnesses that come from the animals and the insects because of the trash in the homes. Here's another neighbor who tells her story, which I wish I had translated, but I didn't. But she's actually an important activist who started a group of theater in El Valle, and she's been a neighbor there her whole life, and she's been through all the governments who said that they were going to improve the living conditions or eradicate, and she said, I'm still here. So also the issue around the water, that the water is not clean water, that it's waste pretty much. That's all throughout the settlement, and that the kids play in it, especially in the summer when in Sevilla it gets to like 40 something degrees Fahrenheit, and the children play in these waters and causes a lot of illness, as well as a lot of bushes that have insects, where there's trash hidden, where there's rats as well. And they said that this is one of the issues that cause so much distress for them as well. And it was interesting because we weren't working on mental health necessarily in this project, but actually they tied everything to,
Buenas tardes.
sorry,
Vivo en el García. Llevo
they tied everything to the physical and psychological consequences of the living conditions. So they discussed the different types of physical conditions. On the left-hand side, you can see they were talking about allergies, they were talking about infections in their urine, they were talking about different infectious diseases. But I thought it was important to share with you all how through the conversations we had and through gathering the evidence, they were able to tie all of this to psychological consequences of their living conditions around anxiety, depression, desperation, low self-esteem, violence, behavioral problems, and how children mimic throughout their this type of behavior in their environment. And so I thought it was helpful to look at how to connect living conditions, how to gather evidence, how conversations over time, instead of blaming, it turns into evidence of the psychological consequences of unjust living conditions. So in short, and this is kind of tying this back to, in summary, how we work together, researchers, NGO, and neighbors, to develop a theory. At the end of the day, this is a theory. We were talking about, the abandonment of public services. We're talking about the discrimination, feeling ignored and humiliated, talking about self-blame, that this is just normal, this is habitual. I was born in these conditions and I'll die in these conditions. My mother was born in this condition and she died in these conditions. And there was, in another group in another neighborhood, they discussed how there's just no Roma in any decision-making space, that they're silenced, their voice doesn't matter, they're not represented. And these photographs actually are, one of the neighbors took a photo of, there's one street, this is not the settlement, this is another neighborhood. There's one street that divides a plaza with a lot of Roma families. And on the other side, which is the photo on the left, is non-Roma part of the neighborhood. And so they were saying, oh, they have recycling, they have perfect grass, and we have that photo. And so they started taking photos for comparison of what happens if you take a right on this street and what happens if you take a left on this street. And the main thing was the psychological distress, and this was apparent. And we did this in three different groups. And a lot of the issues that came up were, imagine waking up every day and seeing this, you're just depressed. It's different to wake up and go see a tree and flowers and a clean neighborhood. That makes you excited to start your day. But when you start your day hearing a fight, seeing and smelling and walking to make sure that the rat doesn't bite your leg while you live with a sense of fear, it's depressing. You leave for a little bit and you come back and it's depressing. And so I think photo voice in that way is really powerful, because it allows to have evidence, like images, to these different psychological experiences caused by these contexts. And then kind of in continuation in another project, we did this process with the girls as well, but we built on the work that we had done with the different adult neighbors in the different contexts. And we did this was more recent. This was a photo voice exhibit where what we did was we took all the photographs we had taken over the years, but also we included in there what were the girls' dreams for the future. So my colleagues had worked very closely with a group of girls, and they did a photo voice project, but not just about the issues in the neighborhood, but also around what their dreams were, what were they looking to be and do, what was important to them, what brought them joy, what brought them the capacity to dream. And so we did a an exhibit with all of these photographs. And our idea was to, you know, I remember some of the girls and some of the women, we all built it together. We actually built it with, we gathered a lot of materials, what we could from the university, from our houses, from everything. And we built the exhibit together. Some of the Roma women knew how to sew, so we sewed everything together. And we called it the House of Dreams. And so on the outside, we put all those photographs of the neighborhood, but inside it was a beautiful home. And we had put, you know, curtains, and there was a girl's room with all her dreams through her photographs. And we invited local policymakers, other researchers, other neighbors to gather more evidence to understand, you know, what are your, you know, we talk about dreams when we were talking to the girls, but in a way it's to say, what matters to you? What matters to you, and what do you need to feel supported, to have all the resources you need to reach those dreams. And so the Photo Voice exhibit was kind of like this physical space that was different. It was shared. It wasn't the NGO office. It wasn't the university. It was like a shared physical space where people felt comfortable to come tell their story, where the mayor came and listened, where other, you know, the housing representative came and listened and talked. And I think, and I know for me, and I know for my colleagues too in the neighborhood, it was an important moment because it was a way of having recognition and how much well-being that provided all of us to work together for this one action that stayed in that moment in time. But we were able to gain more funding for initiatives with the girls. And so I think it was a way to look at how, you know, it starts with a photograph and it could end with advocacy and resources for the things that brought well-being long-term and sustainable to sustainable for now. It's been a short amount of time for the girls and the women as well. And so this was kind of just wanted to tie it back to what I had mentioned earlier around community mattering. So how important it was for people to feel recognized and mattered, and that people from different countries, because we had students from Germany or from Italy who were here, and we were able to take them and feel, and the girls were just amazed that there's people from different countries who want to come see my dreams and my work. And so I think it was powerful in that way to move towards advocacy, and not this idea that we have of mental health and one-on-one counseling, but mental health is a community matter. And how we can use the Photo Voice, what I was mentioning before, to look at those different levels. I shared at the start of the second session of, if we are doing advocacy and using Photo Voice or other evidence that we gather, how can we utilize it for advocacy at multiple levels? At the interpersonal, you're gaining mutual support, you're developing an identity as a group, you're identifying allies and expanding your networks in terms of organizations or institutions, as well as mobilizing the community. So it's a lot of community organizing implicit as well in the process. And also a way to gain more evidence. A lot of times, you know, people say there's no evidence around Roma, but Roma have evidence. And so this is a way to kind of combat that issue around the lack of data, is that we're supporting communities and gathering their own data to tell their own story, and to meet with the city council and other institutions to change. And so kind of put a sentence there to wrap up the Photo Voice, that this type of work ensures that communities are recognized and we can increase their feelings of mattering and control and self-perception, and change the way that they understand Roma identity in this case, you know, and change our responsibility as well from organizations and universities, and change our identities in that way as well. Drink a little water. Another way for this type of citizen science approach that we've used is, and I think that maybe Borjan has also done community mapping, around resources also related to mental health, but we did this in terms of healthcare services. But at the end of the day, looking back and reviewing our work, it is related to mental health. And so just a brief definition, what is community mapping? Well, it's a way to identify the different resources, partners, allies, services, programs, policies, everything that exists in a neighborhood to assess what is happening, where is the power when we're talking about, justice and oppression, and we need to think about power. So power is money, power is influential decision makers. So if we look at what's happening in a community, where is power and how is that actually, it's a form of evaluation, what's strengthening or not strengthening, in this case, mental health and well-being. And so we did a couple of years ago, we mapped the health assets, we call it assets, but resources, where there's, funding. We actually did two types of mapping. There already existed a map of Polígono Sur. This is the neighborhood that I work at every week. And we looked up where are the primary healthcare centers, what are the NGOs? So here you can see where there's the Roma wheel here. These are different, actually, this is important. We did 200 surveys, and 80% of the 200 of Roma people were living in this part of the neighborhood. And here is this roundabout is to go to the city center. And so here there were 0 Roma neighbors. And here, this middle part, there was a little less, and then here there was barely any. And so really Roma were living here. There's a big train track, and here there's a huge highway. So Roma families are tucked away in this part of the neighborhood where there exists 2 evangelical church, a Roma NGO, and that's it, basically. And this is a school. And then here, if we go up towards where the non-Roma neighborhood, we have a healthcare center, we have a community center, we have a community center around this area as well. And what we were doing is to see, okay, so the healthcare centers are where there's the funding, the public funding, the powerful people in the neighborhood, but they're all concentrated in this part of the neighborhood. And here we have evangelical churches and a Roma NGO. And we asked neighbors to tell us where they would go. And a lot of them stayed in this pocket of the neighborhood. We then decided to take it a little further and say, okay, the evidence says that the more collaboration exists between different types of organizations, the more we can support mental well-being. And actually, this was from work that was done by I think he's a social scientist, but he was looking at if mental health resources, thinking beyond primary mental health care services, thinking of NGOs and other types of support systems, the more integrated they are, the higher capacity they are to provide well-being over a long period of time of people with mental health distress. And so we wanted to look at the way that organizations and primary healthcare centers were working together. But if we're looking here, depending on how thin or thick the line is, it represents the type of collaboration. So for example, here there's a very thin dotted line, which means they said that they sometimes reach out to some of these NGOs for support. And then where you see the thicker line, that was a primary health care center to a hospital, is where there was the biggest amount of direct collaboration between its providers, but barely did they work with the church or other organizations. And then this is less important, but also we did this, we decided to do an analysis using what they call social network analysis. And what we saw that the two most important resources in the neighborhood were the church, El Culto, and the primary healthcare center, Polígono Sur, that those were the most powerful within the neighborhood. And we actually saw that these two don't even collaborate with one another. So there's one system that exists and another complete other system. And that although Roma communities were going to their primary healthcare center, the ones that was most important to them was and actually here they had a lot of psychological well-being tied to the church. And then we did this similar process. We did a similar process with Latinx families in the United States that have children with disabilities. And we did a mapping related to both health and mental health care services, where we identified where their resources were and where they found, mental health support, which was a missing formal resource, but that they found a lot of mental health support in the Catholic Church. So it was a different way of doing mapping, more visual to incorporate with the children as well. And one of the key outcomes of these was that there was an advocacy with a local representative in Chicago. This was in Chicago, to advocate for more green spaces and churches, and mental health care services, because this was pre-Trump. And so this was, but after Trump came into power, there was a lot of distress with Latinx families because of all the immigration policies. And so the churches became kind of the safest space for, all the distress and sharing resources that we saw over time. And then I think this was the last one that I prepared today, was the storytelling. And storytelling, this was a project that I worked with, her name is Professor Jenny Pape. She's a public health expert in the UK. And she was very interested in, looking at people's stories behind the data. She was like, there's a lot of quantitative data, but we need people to tell us what their daily lives are like, because the data can't tell us that. And we have to understand people's lives experiences as stories and as truths, and to also challenge dominant narratives around different communities. And so what is storytelling? Practical wisdom. It's a way of having power as well. When stories are told of us, we were talking earlier about stereotypes. That's a power of one story dominating the power of another story. It's a way of creating meaning. Humans make meaning out of the stories we tell each other, and the things that we assume to be true. And oftentimes people who have marginalized experiences, their stories are unknown, they're hidden, they're not part of our school systems. It's convenient that the stories told on the margins are hidden. And so storytelling in a lot of ways is a way for people to heal, to not only tell them what their experience is, but also a way of healing as well. And so the project that I was a part of, and the women I partner with, Gilo, here in Sevilla, the group of mothers and women, Gilo, was called the Other Frontline Initiative. And this was done in response, and I think a good example of using digital to tell people's stories and to fight against more structural aspects. And the idea was that everyone kept talking about, the other front line, or not the other front line. People kept talking about the front line of the pandemic, the healthcare workers, the, other types of service workers that were the front line of the pandemic. And so the project is called The Other Frontline, which is all these communities that were facing full vulnerabilization during the pandemic, that they were the other front line of the pandemic as well. And so she identified different researchers and NGOs that were working in kind of a storytelling way to partner and have a website where these different groups from different countries could tell their stories. And so in this case, there's issues around early marriages in Bulgaria. There was a young teenager who would write her stories about the mental health distress she was facing during the lockdowns, living in poverty-stricken area of, I think it was Wales in England. There was also partners in Brazil and Italy, and it was a way of sharing people's experiences, and a lot of them were tied to mental health because of fear, because of distrust, because of a lot of issues that were coming up during lockdowns. And also, I do want to say that, for example, the Jilo women didn't want to tell their negative experiences. They wanted to talk about their strengths. They wanted to talk about their ways of resisting. They wanted to talk about how they were hard workers and all the things that they did, living in terrible context of, lack of resources, discrimination from the media, but they wanted to challenge that narrative. And so here's the website, which I'll pass you all the resources on the presentation later, but I think it's, and I also think we're going to reactivate it as well. So if you find this interesting and useful, I'd be happy to connect and you become part of the network. It's really interesting to just share and connect with different people who share similar values in terms of social justice and working with different communities. And I know, for example, for the women, for them, it was so proud to see their story in English on a website that other people were reading, and being able to share that on their Facebooks and their own personal networks as well. And so back to the mattering, right? This is a way to tell people that they matter and that their stories matter. And this was kind of similar to the image I have on the citizen science presentation, but this was kind of like, how did we do this? How did we support Jilo in telling their stories? And what did me and my colleague, who is a research assistant, how did we support Jilo in telling the story? Well, we have a WhatsApp group. In the WhatsApp group, we talked about, okay, we have this opportunity to tell different stories. What do we want to talk about COVID related? And there, the women were talking about different things that were coming up for them. And for that, we always send audio messages. And so that was the easiest way of brainstorming, because we were still in lockdown. Sevilla had very strict lockdown measures. Spain had very strict lockdown measures. And my job and the research assistant job was to transcribe all the audios. We sent it to the women in a Google document. And together we would do a Zoom call or a WhatsApp call, and we would build the story together, and we'd do titles and we'd do feedback. And one woman said, no, don't put that because that sounds negative about us, but how can we put this in positive? And it was just a collaborative group process that was similar, I think, back to what I was saying around the photo voice. And these were the different themes that came up for Jilo, the daily forms of resistance, the experience of being a Roma woman, the importance of family and social support, and what their hopes were for the future. And as part of, and this was, I wanted to share this slide. We did a workshop with the other people who supported groups and telling stories. And we did a Mentimeter to see what everyone thought was the most important thing to support people in storytelling. And a lot of things that came up were things that, we learn in psychology, which is building trust, partnership, helping people feel safe, empathizing, helping people feel confident. A lot of people who maybe have a completely different background in the work that they were doing were embodying a lot of ways of taking care of people in these situations. And so I thought that maybe this could be a helpful way of looking. And I'm sure that a lot of you, and I at least, feel seen with this, because a lot of times we play the role of listening to really hard and heavy stories. And that means we have to listen and respect and understand and empathize and not impose or say what we have to do. It's more of like a shared journey and support system, especially since we're talking about mental health in this context. And this was another example, but I don't think we have a lot of time, so maybe I won't share, but this is actually really interesting. this was another way of doing storytelling with a group of people without homes in Manchester. And they did a maze of how difficult it is to have resources and kind of the distress that causes you. And they did this as a way for advocacy. And so if you click on the website, you have to make decisions about where do you sleep at night? Who do you talk to? And then it's like a game, a maze, and it was a way of raising awareness around health and mental health issues around people without homes. And so if you want, we can stop here, and then if we have time, we can do the third session, or I can at least walk you through it a little bit.
Daniela, do we have 30 minutes till the end.
Mhm.
Is it enough for the exercise, or we can make it shorter or in another way?
Whatever you guys prefer. I would love to listen to, I don't know, thoughts that you have, and then we can go into the exercise and I can walk you through it. Even if we don't finish, then
Okay.
you'll have at least the template,
Okay.
or
Yes.
whatever you all want. I'm happy either way. I just feel like I'm tired of listening to myself.
We agree with you, so we can go.
Go on.
Before moving forward with the exercise, do we have some questions or comments about the Daniela's presentation so far, or?
Just shortly. Nice presentation again. We also use some of these techniques to our working, just as you say, photo voice. We use it in one project with ecology. It was simple with that you show, and it has a very great success and impact on the community. But unfortunately, our municipalities doesn't have the ear for the problems of the people, especially in Roma community. And also we are using the everyday interaction because we have 24/7 free legal aid. We are doing that through phone line and also in our organization. Because we through our organization, we kept establishing Center for Access to Justice, which give free legal aid to all people in need, and also community events and open days in the community. So that's our main actions that we use to get closer to the communities.
And can you tell me about the Photo Voice project?
Yes, it was a project for ecology. We have mapping on the wild dumps near Roma's settles and also in the rural municipalities. We also do creative action. We name it Project Dump. We were put tables as it was something that is approved by the municipalities, and the main there was all photographs of that. We marked it with ribbons. Also, we circled it, and we also said that is funded by the municipality, and it is for the best interest of the settlements of the people who live there. It was some ironic. And then we took photos, and we do photo voice with some notes. And also we have open day in the center of the town when we presented all of those photo voice.
It's a good irony.
Yes, our organization is known about doing some ironic creative actions. And the way it's the most good way to attract the attention of the local municipality.
Absolutely.
And they are always mad, but we don't care.
People in power always get mad.
Yes, and so also I wanted to tell you that I don't know about the others, but I understand Spanish. We, as in Macedonia, when we were young, we watch a lot of Spanish telenovelas.
Oh, really?
So we know the Spanish very well. I read and I understand everything.
Oh.
So don't be sorry because you didn't translate it for us.
You. I appreciate that. I'm wondering, even going back for a moment, that's funny about the telenovelas. I grew up watching telenovelas because my mom is Venezuelan. I wonder if you could even go back and use your, and we've done this before, like use the photo voice project that you already have and ask questions related to mental health and see what comes up, because it could be a way of recycling, not having to do a whole new project, but recycling what you already have and relating it to mental health.
Any other questions or comments?
Shall we continue?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll see how far we get, and if not, at least you'll have access and I can show you what I thought we could do, because I thought we would have a little more time. So for the final part of the session, what I had prepared was to develop an action plan for advocacy around mental health and well-being, as it is one of the priorities that came up for you all as a group. And so this is my idea. So I'll share, we can do part of it at least, and I can set it up for you all so it can be ready to go when you want to use it. And plus, Miro boards are so easy to access for people in different places. And I'd be happy to meet again and like look over it or, so the idea was to develop an advocacy plan at multiple levels. I know Zoran has experience doing this with us because it's similar, but a little different than other ones that we have done. And so I've divided it into 3 steps. First, we'll use the Mentimeter. So you all have 5 minutes to think by yourself and include priorities that you think would be important to address from the Copasa network in terms of mental health. And then we'll go into the Miro board and we can do the exercise of, it's called nominal groups in research. I'm sure that it's like voting basically. And each person has to rate from 1 to 3 what they think are the most important priorities. And then the one who has the most points is the priority we'll use to do the advocacy plan. So I don't know, is that clear? I'll show you. We'll just do it step by step, and then in case it's not. Plus, I'm used to doing this with like a colleague who will quickly open the Mentimeter, and so you have to be patient with me. Let me think of how to do this, to do both things at once. Okay. So I will share this for a moment because I don't want you guys to see what the other puts. And if you think that we could change the question, we can also change the question. But the idea is to answer this individually. We can give 5 minutes. It's 12:38. At 12:43. We can come back, but you can take time and answer as many as you would like around what the mental health priority should be as a network. And so if you go to menti.com, and then here, I'll put this all in the chat actually.
Can you provide a link in the chat or
Yep.
no? Yeah.
Yes, let me do that. That'll be easier. Hold on, give me a moment. Share. Here we go. Let me know if it works though, because I don't. Does the link work to put in answers?
For me, yes.
Okay.
I don't know for others. If you have any problems, please let us know.
Should we choose one of the answers you suggested before or to write something new?
Just write whatever you find important. So what do you think as a group, as a network, what are the mental health priorities that you should work on together?
Thank you.
Okay, we'll do 2 more minutes. Okay. I have 6 respondents and there's 6 of you, so we're going to work with that. Give me a moment to copy and paste this into the Miro board. Okay, that was miraculously quick on my part. Okay, hold on real quick. Okay, so this is the Miro board I prepared for you all. Here are the answers to the Mentimeter, if you want to just take a look for a moment, because this is an activity, or maybe you all have experience doing this too, but this is something we do with the girls, with the women as a research team. We like to have a moment for people to think on their own what they find important before entering into discussion. So let me know if you can see this okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have raising awareness about psychological distress, improving infrastructure in poor communities, joint research that includes information from different countries and address issues of one specific community, such as Roma, creating joint platform for advocating together, access to healthcare services, improving access to social services, addressing stigma and discrimination, and education of marginalized communities. And so the second step would be, so there's 6 of you, and I think we have time to do this part, would be to do voting. So for example, And you have to do it kind of out loud, your logic. So imagine if I voted and I think that the most important is addressing stigma and discrimination. Well, then, oh wait, hold on. Let me make sure this is sent back. I would put a 3 here. And the next one I think is important is improving access to social services. And the least that I want to include is raising awareness. And then each person does this, and then whichever one has the most amount of points would be the one we work with. So who wants to be the first? And this is a good way to debate as well as a team, no? About why we think one issue is the most important. Borjan, you want to start? Because I know you, and so I can pick on you.
Okay, yeah. Oof. Maybe because we are working with different vulnerable groups, maybe what is let's say important for everyone is access to healthcare services.
Okay.
Then addressing stigma and discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
And improving access to social services.
Okay. Who's next?
I can be next.
Okay.
3 points go to raising awareness about psychological distress,
Mm-hmm.
access to healthcare services 2, and improving access to social services 1.
Can I go next?
Yes.
Raising awareness about psychological distress 3, stigma and discrimination 2, and access to social services 1. Thank you.
Okay, we have Zoran Gita. Now they're missing in action.
Missing action, yeah. Maybe we could if this is missing in action, if we can share this with the entire with all the members of
Yeah.
they can also
Perfect. Yeah, if you want, I can just walk you through. So this would be, if you want, you can even, if this is a question, for example, this is a question I thought of with knowing, maybe I would change it now, but if this is the question that you want to address, and then just Mentimeter, or people can just put stickies and then do a voting like this. And then which, for example, this one, raising awareness about psychological distress would be the winner, no? And so what I did was set up this advocacy plan, no? So here you can write the priority. Imagine if it was raise awareness about psychological distress. And then people here could just look at the different objectives. So similar to the presentation around looking at the different levels, no? Like what can we do interpersonally? What can we do as an organization? What can we do in the wider community? And kind of analyze and look through, okay, what would our objective be to raise awareness about psychological distress legally or in institutions, no? Who do we have as support? A ministry, the mayor, you know, the school. Who would our opponents and barriers be? Look at, you know, is there a new law that came out or a recent incidents that came out that is now a barrier? at the national level or at the local level? And then what evidence? So thinking about the different, you know, the photo voice that you already have, or the different surveys that you have, or narratives, what evidence can help support this objective? And then what are the key actions you can do as a network or as a representative of your organization in the network? And then just go through each one of these levels to kind of have a shared plan, and it can serve for us when we've used something like this. It's a nice way to go back and maybe 6 months or in a year and say, okay, what worked, what didn't work, you know, a way of like internal valuation as a network as well. So yeah, so I'll send this here. I'll share this link with you all.
Daniela, excuse me, can you just write just an example in the objectives under each of these systemic, community, organizational, interpersonal, for the people to be more acquainted what to write? Just some examples. Just for the objectives, not the entire table.
Okay. Actually, I think I have a really good example with the advocacy plans that we did in Macedonia. If you give me a moment, I'll pull them up because they were so specific, and I think that they're more helpful maybe than me making something up and you guys being like, that makes no sense. Hold on.
Perfect.
Let me look up real quick.
Also, can you share the presentation with us?
Yes, I will send it.
Okay, thank you.
Well, here's the Miro. Hold on while I look up the. Here we go. This was actually, these were really good. So we did a similar, but with other colleagues of mine from CESPI, we did a similar action plans with 5 different, I think it was 5 different organizations in Northern Macedonia. And so here, let me just show you one. One was around, their objective was raising awareness about the importance of preschool education among Roma parents. And so at the systemic level, we analyzed what were the causes and the consequences of not having awareness. And so we analyzed the problem a little bit, and then we created an objective. So at the systemic level, the objective was to assure that funds are implemented. We thought of the different allies, well, the NGO, Roma leaders, the mediators, the Roma women who were working at the kindergarten, the opponents, fake news, lack of funds for transport, and then the different evidence that you know, and usually NGOs are such a rich source of real information and evidence. Well, only 2 children attend kindergarten. And the key action was advocacy for free of charge transport. At the community level, raising awareness about the importance of preschool education among Roma parents. At the community level, insufficient awareness among Roma parents about preschool education. What are the consequences? Insecurity in the employees at the kindergarten. And the objective was to raise awareness among Roma parents about the importance of school. The allies were Roma leaders in the community. The opponents were the distrust that the community had in the different institutions. This was during the worst of the pandemic. And so it was a lot of fear around schools and COVID from Roma families, at least in Spain, and I think it was similar here as well. And so the actions were to meet with Roma parents and do some workshops around the importance of preschool education. And then similar, we did a family level. And so here the action for the family was around raising awareness, ensuring communication between employees in the kindergarten and Roma parents. And then at the individual level, and so this is really similar to the other model around mental distress, right? The individual level, well, there was a lot of lack of awareness, the COVID crisis at the moment. The target and the action was to increase the number of Roma children enrolled in preschool education. The main ally was the mediator for a project, inclusion of Roma children. And the main opponent, which is an important one, was the lack of sensitivity among the employees of the kindergarten. And so the action was that the mediators serve as a link between parents and employees and start doing a sort of control of absenteeism and attendance at school to identify what the problems were together with the parents. And so these were the different levels. We analyzed kind of the causes of the problem, the consequences, the objective, what can people at the systemic do to support our need to get kids to school, no? And then the action at the end. I don't know if that's clear, if you have any questions. And I think the nice thing about the Miro board, which we've started using more and ever because of the pandemic, I'm sure, I don't even know if that was around before the pandemic, but it's nice because it gives people time to think for themselves as well before, and you don't know who put what, so you're not influenced too much by who put something where. So it's nice to have like a shared group project, but time to think individually as well, which I think that's where good ideas come from, not just with one leader, but multiple people thinking. I don't know what, we have 5 minutes left. If you have any comments or questions, not helpful, helpful. Oh, wait, can we take a picture before we go? I think Zoran already left.
I took several pictures.
Okay, good.
Pictures already, I think.
Good.
I will have the final one.
I can prove it to my boss that I was at a workshop.
I have another one.
Well, I would love to stay in contact. Well, I'll follow your work because I follow your website. So
Thank you.
So I'll send all this in for all the PowerPoint and all the links to everything so you can all have it. And I'm available on my email mostly all day, every day. So if you have any questions.
Well, if you don't have any questions, well, thank you very much, Daniela, for the today's workshop. I think it was very useful for the people, although I'm following it for me for the third time, but it's still always useful and inspiring. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of you for your participation and contribution. So I really appreciate the last part, although it's just a beginning. It gives us a good example and guidance how to plan maybe our future joint action addressing mental health of vulnerable groups. So thank you all very much and have a pleasant rest of the day.
Thank
And
you.
we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.